Hey, welcome back to another episode of Sweeter After Difficulty. I am Randy Highsmith, and I've got a question for you today. Have you ever had a conversation that changed your life? And not because somebody had all the answers and not because somebody gave you, some great advice, but just because somehow you walked away seeing things differently than when you sat down. I've been thinking about that question for a long time now because when I look back over my own life, the moments that changed me, almost all of them started with a conversation. So I've been thinking about this big idea lately, and I've started to examine what we see, and I'm noticing all these patterns, right? Not just on podcasts, but everywhere. We are surrounded by information. There's advice, there's opinions, there's algorithms, all this noise affecting everything we do every day. But we're starving for places where we can simply think out loud without feeling like we have to defend ourselves. Let that sink in for a second. I don't think the problem is that we're lacking information. I mean, we've got more information than we've ever had. I think that what we've lost is space, safe space to think, to ask questions, to change our minds, space to tell the truth, starting with telling the truth to ourselves, right? A little over a year ago, I started a podcast, this podcast, Sweeter After Difficulty. And over the course of the year, I've gotten to have some really amazing conversations with a ton of really great people from, all walks of life, from all areas of my life. Um, a lot of jujitsu, much to my brother's chagrin. Actually, he's come around a lot on it, but there's a lot of jujitsu, especially in some of those earlier episodes. But we talk about everything, we talk about leadership and marriage and friendships, writing. So I started thinking about what that means. What does it mean to make room for someone? I think of myself first and foremost, not as an expert at all. I think of myself as a student. I'm here to learn. And I hope that you're here to learn too. One of the main things that I try to really grab onto is this, sort of overarching sense of curiosity. I want to know how everything works. I want to have information to fill all the gaps in my knowledge. I want to know, good or bad, I want all of the information. And what I thought was, I wanted better answers, right? I wanted to know what the answers were to everything. So I went looking for those things. I went to subject matter experts. I read books. I watched videos. I watched movies. I watched documentaries, right? I asked questions. And over time, what I've come to realize is that I didn't need answers. I didn't need more answers. In fact, what I was just talking about a minute ago, I mean, we are literally drowning in answers. And most of them are wrong, by the way. Even the ones that are right for someone else might be wrong for you. But what we can all try to do better at is not getting better answers, it's asking better questions. Some of the most important questions I've ever had actually started with myself. So I started this project called the Honest Conversations Project. The Honest Conversations Project. This project is not about teaching you anything. It's about slowing down. It's about paying attention. It's about hyperactively listening. Some of it's about being willing to be wrong. Some of it's just about making room for someone else or having the courage to tell yourself the truth. The biggest part of this project that I think struck me is that there's a difference between truth and reality, right? Reality is what is, but truth is how we try to understand reality. It's the filter that we put over reality to make it make sense to us. So one of the big ideas in this project is it's not just about truth, because truth can be personal. It can be yours. it can be completely in contradiction to someone else's truth, but you're both operating in the same reality. And so you can start to see where truth and reality, while they are related, they are definitely not the same thing. And we want to make a space where reality gets a vote, right? Where we're not just willing to settle for the story that we've written about what it is. We want to know what it actually is. But you can't talk about what it is without talking about what it isn't. First and foremost, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm just someone who's really been actively paying attention and listening to people my entire life. And I have a pretty good memory and I'm able to put together patterns. So I'm not here to give you therapy. I'm not here to be a counselor. I'm not trying to debate with you. I've certainly spent enough years of my life debating and arguing with people, and it's definitely not about manipulating people. It is definitely not about learning clever communication techniques that you can use to win arguments, and it's not about becoming someone you're not. In fact, the one of the core principles of this thing is learning, finding, discovering, being curious enough about reality that you want to go back and ask yourself some questions. So I went through these stories. I put all my stories down. I started reading through them. And I realized that there was sort of a set of guiding principles that developed through those stories and have become the guiding principles of my life. So the thing about it is they all came from a story. So one of the first stories that I told when I was starting to write all the stories in my book is a story about when I was really little. I was like around 3 or 4 years old. I was waiting on the edge of the grass for my dad to come visit, and with my brother, and we're sitting out there all day, and then eventually it starts to get dark, and my mom has to come get us and take us inside, and I absolutely threw a fit. Right, I threw a fit because I had been told that I was waiting for someone. And if I stepped away from my post in my young brain, I would make it impossible for that to happen. So I had a set of choices that were based off of inexperience, immaturity, being a child, right? I had no frame of reference for everything. I had a couple of options on ways I could deal with this. I could accept it, which I discovered quickly was not in my nature, or I could reject it and fight it. Those were my two options. But as I've thought back on this story over the course of the years, my perspective on it changes a little bit, as it will, right? You start thinking back on things with a little bit different eye. And hopefully now you're aware that there are different ways that you can handle that situation. Awareness creates options. So now if I'm in a situation, well, hopefully I'm not, put into a situation where I'm waiting on the edge of the lawn for my dad to come see me. But if I'm put into a situation where I had a very primitive set of choices, and now as an adult, I find myself in a similar situation, the awareness that I've gained between those times should have given me a considerable number of options that I can factor in when I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do or how I'm going to approach the situation. Now, I think that that's where the responsibility comes in, because once you're aware and once you have a better way of dealing with it, then you're held accountable as an adult for the choice you make. But I want to really sink into the concept that the more I'm aware of the possibilities, the more options I have on how to deal with those situations. And then whatever I choose, I'm held responsible for. Okay. The next thing that I started thinking about was this idea of curiosity, right? Because for me, when I was young, a certainty of knowledge was a protective layer for me, right? If I was sure I was right, there was no sense in even arguing. There was no point in arguing with me because I already knew I was right, right? I lost the desire to be curious because certainty offered me safety. See what I'm saying? So as a child, I was thinking, okay, if I'm right, I can stick to my guns. I can sink my heels in the concrete here. I'm not going to be moved. I will be right and I will be safe. But I didn't give myself the opportunity to even factor in the idea that there might be another way to look at it, right? I prioritized safety over curiosity. That certainty was safety. And so now I'm running it back, right? Now I'm going, you know what? I'm going to go back to asking questions. See, when I was reading books, I was asking questions. Tell me about these people. Tell me about these places. Tell me about these things that happened. Tell me about how this works. It was all to do the same thing. I was asking questions. And then when I had a big enough knowledge base, I became sure at one point, right? Again, at an immature time in my life, I became sure that I was right and I stopped being curious about it. And so I'm circling back now, right? Now I'm aware that I settled. So that awareness brings me the option to go back and revisit everything that I decided for sure from that point going forward. I owe that a revisit, and I owe it a revisit with a more curious lens and not such a settled lens. Okay. The idea about reality getting a vote. Well, again, like I said, when we start to stack up our truths, I actually heard it said, our perspective is our reality, right? And your perspective could also be another way of saying your truth, right? It is the way that you see reality. It is the cover that you've put on it, right? And all the things that go with that, that is what your truth is. That is what your perspective is. But there is a lot of adaptation that affects our truth, right? I told another story once on an episode of the podcast. But when I was a kid, one day I wasn't feeling well and I wandered into the kitchen and my mom was making some sort of cookie or something. And she had just opened a bottle of vanilla and I had never smelled vanilla anymore before that. So that was the first time. And so I remember smelling it. I felt my stomach gurgle and I threw up on the floor. And for a long time after that, I was convinced that I was allergic to the smell of vanilla, that it made me throw up. That was just what my young brain thought. And I didn't question it. I didn't question it until the early 90s when vanilla came into popularity and it started being like that everything smelled like vanilla. The reality was I'm not allergic to, nor does the smell of vanilla make me sick. I actually enjoy the smell of vanilla and the taste of vanilla. I was sick for something completely unrelated, right? Some sort of stomach bug. But I associated it until my awareness gave me an opportunity to go, okay, let's get curious about that again. Was it really vanilla? And it turns out it wasn't. Right. So I could have been denying myself all these delicious vanilla-y treats my entire life just because I never bothered to go back and check, was that really what made me sick or not? One of the next principles is clarity is kindness. And I know that I've heard lots of different iterations of this. I've had it said to me by a lot of different people, clear is kind and those kind of things. But the reason why this one is so important to me is because a lot of the times when communication breaks down, it's because there are unmet expectations or unmet wants on the part of one person or the other. And I find that a lot of the times, the reason why they're unmet is simply because the request wasn't made clearly enough. And the person receiving the request just didn't take the time to stop them and say, hey, I'm not sure. I need to clarify this is what you're asking for. Or even after the fact, right? Coming back and going, okay, I see what you did. That's not what I was looking for. Let me be a little bit more clear with you, right? To not do that leaves someone in a place where they have to constantly guess. And when we start guessing, we're not really representing ourselves anymore. Now we're putting on a mask or a character that we hope represents what you're looking for. And without ever being clear, we could cycle through constantly putting on different personalities until we figure out what it is that you really are asking. And by that time, where does authenticity fall into that? How can you feel good about the conversation or about the situation or about the relationship? Right? So clarity is kindness. We're going to talk a lot about that in the weekly letters, and we'll tell you more about what the weekly letters are in just a little bit here. But I want to cook through some more of these principles. The next one that I started thinking about is that protection eventually becomes isolation. And this one is really near and dear to me because I won't get too deep into it right now, but I discovered Enneagrams, right? And so I started figuring out what Enneagrams are, and it turns out that the Enneagram number that I have representing me is someone who picked up armor and put it on when they were very young and learned how to make it fit. The armor kept me safe, which became my priority. So I learned to prioritize my safety all the way up until adulthood, really. And what I started to realize was I got to a place where I couldn't understand why I didn't have connection. I didn't have closeness. I didn't have that sort of bond with other people. And the reason is because I had already built this natural barrier between me and them that they ran into, and I wasn't even aware of it anymore. Right? It's sort of like when you drive a car long enough, you go to pull into a spot, you know how long the front end is, right? You've been driving this car long enough that you're not hitting the curbs anymore. That's how it felt. My armor had an end point that I was aware of, but I didn't realize that eventually isolated me from being available to anyone. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about and a lot of the things that I'm asking myself questions about right now is, what things am I protecting myself from now that I don't need to protect myself from anymore? That armor was picked up when I was a much smaller, much more fragile, much more emotionally and, mentally undeveloped version of myself, who all they were thinking was, when I get behind this plate of armor, nothing hits me. It's loud, but I'm not getting hurt. I'm safe. And so that became something that I did my entire life until I started intentionally pulling those pieces down. And that happened because one of the biggest principles, and what I started this with, is that honest conversations begin with ourselves. Before you can be honest with anyone else, you have to be able to be honest with yourself. And I'm not going to lie to you. Being honest with yourself sucks. Especially when you're dealing with things that you built adaptations for that have served you by running on autopilot and not making you have to be aware that you're still living under an adaptation. But now you're aware of other things as an adult, right? Or you're aware of other things at this place in your life, wherever you are. Now you're aware. And so you have options. You owe that honest conversation to yourself. And if you care about people around you, if you care about having any sort of closeness or any sort of real honest bonding or relationships with people, you have to be able to be honest with them. And that starts with you. So honest conversations begin with ourselves. I think that the reason why we don't do that is because it's painful, right? Or it can be painful. And the idea that we can stop or not do something painful rather than hurt ourselves constantly seems like an easy choice, right? Who wants to deal with the pain? But the thing is that pain has become a limiting factor for you. It's keeping you from becoming yourself, the real you, not the version that you play, not your characters, not the adaptations that you develop to keep you safe. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it was pretty mind-blowing to me. Some of the conversations that I was having with my brother about situations that we both experienced, that we were both in the same rooms for, that the temperature was the same, the carpet was the same, the air was the same. We were literally in the same room, hearing and seeing the same things, and we have completely different memories about those things. Your stories will help you lower your defenses. And once you start telling the story, you might get to a painful part and you might say, oh, okay, I don't necessarily want to deal with this part. I'm going to encourage you to deal with that part, right? Ask yourself why. Does that adaptation, you know why you picked it up then? You know why you did. And maybe it's kept you safe all the way up till today. Maybe it stopped serving you years ago and it's just dragging you down and keeping you from progressing. So the option is take those new options that awareness gave you and free yourself, become more of who you're actually meant to be, or settle for the choice you made when you had no options and don't evolve as a person. I mean, it seems like an easy choice, right? But pain and fear are amazing deterrents to the things that we want to or need to get done in our lives. But stories also let us recognize ourselves without feeling accused. You know, you can start telling that story that you remember the way you tell it and the details that you have and all those things. You can tell all those things and do that way in a consequence-free environment, right? Remind yourself what the stories are. What are the details you remember? Does it matter? Does that adaptation that you built in that time still serve? Is it still around? Right? Obviously, we're not just talking about like a birthday party, unless there was a specific thing that happened at the birthday party that everybody should remember fairly closely to the same details, right? But what we're talking about now is we're talking about getting into our own stories. We're talking about digging deep into the attics and opening those old boxes and looking at our old stuff and looking at our old pictures and remembering not only the things that were good, but also remembering the things that were maybe painful. That's why every Sunday, the letter that I'm going to send out, it does three things. It tells a story, it offers an observation, and it asks a question or gives you something that you can sit with about that story. And what we're doing is we're literally just sending out weekly letters to try to have conversations. It's free. There's no obligations. There's not even really an offer that could cost you something. If you go to randyhighsmith.com, you can download the book, Pull Up a Chair right now. It's just a short little book that's kind of talking about these philosophies and the things that I've been discovering and uncovering in myself. And then you can enter your email and hit the subscribe button. And every Sunday, you're going to receive a weekly letter. It's not a newsletter. It's not advertising anything. I'm promising you right now, there will be no spam. It's three things: a story, an observation, and a question or something that you can sit with. So as I'm thinking about that, it starts to feel more like a practice, right? Something that you're doing intentionally. And that's actually how I want it to feel. I want this to be something that we practice because it's something I'm actively practicing, and it's made huge leaps and bounds in my ability to communicate with people, to ask better questions, and to really start drilling down and asking myself better questions. But it's different than just the podcast, right? It's different than doing coaching. It's different than writing a book. It's different than being a teacher. I really am not here to teach you anything. Again, I just want to ask better questions. I just want to learn about you. I just want you to help me to expand my perspective, to raise my awareness, to give me more options so that I have better lenses to look back at my life through, to make better choices and become more of who I'm supposed to be today and tomorrow. I think that honest conversations, getting back to having honest conversations with each other, will lead to better lives. Go to randyhighsmith.com, download Pull Up a Chair, enter your email, and I'll send you the weekly letter every Sunday morning when you get up, whether you're on the West Coast or on the East Coast. That email will be there. You can open your weekly letter, have a cup of coffee, read a quick story, hear a couple of observations, and then take a question that you can apply to your own life and your own circumstances and your own situations. And hopefully That will help you to ask yourself better questions. That will help you to be more honest with yourself, which will help you to be more honest with other people and ask them better questions. See how this works? It all rolls downhill, right? So I'm not trying to build something crazy. I'm just trying to build a practice. Everything else that I'm doing simply supports the work that goes into that practice. You know, it's a crazy time in the world. I don't know if you noticed that, but you're probably seeing the same things I do. You know, if you're on watching the news or if you're on X or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, any social media, any news channel, any of that stuff, you know, people have become extremely reactive. We're being less and less proactive and we're becoming more and more reactive. We're not even stopping to ask questions anymore. We're just reacting to our initial impression of a situation. So we're not slowing down to listen. We're not even giving someone a chance to talk. We are absolutely certain, because we've just seen it with our eyes or just heard it with our ears, we are so certain that we have no interest in being curious. I mean, we're connected all the time, but very few people know us. Think about the people that you would say really know you. And now go even deeper than that, not the surface level know you. The people who you know, there's nothing you could say, no fact you could reveal about yourself that would ever drive those people away. Compare that number to the number of followers that you have on social media. And I'm not saying that all social media is bad or that it doesn't serve its purpose. You know, I'm not saying that at all. Okay. What I am saying is it is not a substitution for a real, honest conversation between people. It's not a substitution. I think we're hungry for life to slow down a little bit. I think we're starving for something quieter, something a little bit more honest. And so again, I want to invite you, not into a business, not into a sales funnel. I want to invite you to a conversation. You know, maybe the next conversation that changes your life isn't a dramatic one. Maybe it's just sitting across from your spouse or your child or a friend or a parent. Maybe it's finally being brave enough to be honest with yourself about something that you know you've been lying to yourself about. Maybe it starts there. But I want to bring it all the way back to what I asked you in the beginning. That one question. Have you ever had a conversation that changed your life? What if the next one is waiting for you? Thanks for pulling up a chair. As always, I'm grateful you're here, and I'm super excited for you to join me on this journey to better and more honest conversations that lead to better lives. I love you, and I'll see you on the next episode.